Okay, so in the world of theology, there are a few phrases that are just explosive, and replacement theology is definitely one of them. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, loaded with all kinds of historical baggage and accusation. But what if the very thing everyone's arguing about isn't even real? What if it's all just a big misunderstanding? Today we're going to dig into this whole idea and see if it's a real doctrine or maybe, just maybe, a cleverly built straw man. And look, you hear statements like this all the time. This is a really serious charge. The basic accusation is that some Christians believe the church just swooped in and completely replaced Israel in God's master plan, basically making the Jewish people and their history irrelevant. It's often painted as this super dangerous, even heretical idea.
And that right there is the core question for us today. What if that definition, the one that gets attacked so fiercely, is actually a complete misreading of the situation? What if the target everyone's aiming at is a ghost?
This leads us to a fascinating counter-argument, the idea that this fierce debate isn't about an actual biblical teaching at all, but a caricature of one. Some have even called it a theological hoax, or more precisely, a straw man that's been set up just so it can be easily knocked down.
So, just so we're all on the same page, what is a straw man argument? Well, it's a classic debate tactic. You take your opponent's real argument, you twist it into something that's way easier to attack, and then you attack that twisted version instead. You're not fighting the real person, you're fighting a scarecrow. So is that what's been happening here? Let's take a look at the evidence, and we've got to start right at the beginning.
To really test this whole straw man theory, we have to rewind the clock, way back. We need to ask a simple question. Who exactly were the very first believers in the New Testament? The answer to this, you'll see, is kind of the key to this whole debate.
The scriptures themselves lay out a very clear sequence of events. The message of the gospel wasn't intended to go around Israel. It was aimed directly at Israel first and foremost. And we're not talking about some small fringe group either. I mean, on the day of Pentecost, which is described in the book of Acts, something like 3,000 people joined this new movement in one day. But the really critical question is, who were they? And here is the absolute kicker. They were all Jewish. This first community, these 3,000 people, were devout Jews from all over. They were addressed as the House of Israel. They worshipped at the temple every day. And for about the first 10 years, this movement was exclusively Jewish. So this whole idea of some outside group coming in and replacing Israel, well, it just doesn't line up with the facts on the ground. Okay, now let's shift gears and look at the language itself, because this is where the argument gets even more compelling. It turns out that this entire modern divide we've created between Israel and the church, it might all come down to the translation of a single word. And that word is ecclesia. You see it all over the New Testament, and what it means is absolutely pivotal. See, today, when we see that word, our brains automatically translate it as church. But was that what it originally meant? And here's where you can see this shift happen. Originally, the Greek word ecclesia and its Hebrew counterpart kahal was a really common word. It just meant an assembly or a congregation. In fact, it was the standard word used for the assembly of Israel in the Old Testament. The idea of it being this special, institutional thing called the church, that came much, much later. You can actually trace this journey. In the Hebrew Old Testament, the word for Israel's community was kahal. When it was translated into Greek, they used ecclesia, and early English Bibles, like the one from William Tyndale, got it right. They translated it as congregation. But then, in 1611, something changed. The people translating the King James Version were given a very specific new instruction. And there it is. That was the rule. It literally says that the word ecclesia had to be translated as church, and specifically not as congregation. This wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was a deliberate decision. The impact of that one little rule was massive. It essentially built a wall where one never existed before. All of a sudden, it looked like the Bible was talking about two totally different groups. You had Israel's congregation, back in the Old Testament, and then this brand new thing, called the church, popped up in the New Testament. A separation was created purely through translation. So if replacement is the wrong framework, what's the right one? Well, the biblical writers actually offer a completely different way of looking at it. It's a framework built on addition and inclusion, not on kicking someone out. The big metaphor the New Testament uses isn't about, chopping down one tree and planting a new one. It's this really powerful image from farming and agriculture. It's about grafting, about adding new branches to a tree that's already alive and growing. Let's just walk through this picture for a second. You start with the original olive tree. That's the assembly, the ecclesia of Israel. Then you take these new branches, which represent believers from all the other nations, and you skillfully graft them right into the main trunk.
The result isn't two different trees standing side by side. It's one single, unified tree that's now stronger and more complete.
The theological point here is just profound. This whole grafting process creates what the Apostle Paul calls one new man. It's not about one group taking over for another. It's about the wall that separated them being completely demolished so they can become one unified family.
All right, so let's pull all these threads together. You might be wondering, okay, that's interesting, but why does this really matter? Well, it matters a lot, because this isn't just an academic debate about old words. The way we frame this has huge consequences for how we understand our faith, our history, and our community right now.
So let's just do a quick recap of the journey we've been on. We've seen how that common accusation of replacement theology really looks a lot like a straw man. We've established that the very first community of believers was just a continuation of Israel's own assembly, its ecclesia. We discovered how one little translation choice literally created a separation that wasn't there before. And finally, we saw that the Bible's own picture for this is grafting in, a story all about inclusion and addition, not replacement.
And all of this leaves us with one last, really big question to chew on. If there aren't two separate groups, but just one continuous community of God's people, one single unbroken story that stretches from ancient Israel all the way to today, well, how might that change our entire understanding of history? And maybe even more important, how might that change our understanding of our own faith? That's a question that could redefine, well, just about everything. Thanks for digging into this with us.